Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. We are up to Sefer Devarim, Parshas Devarim, Deuteronomy, page 938 in the Hebrew, 939 in the English. And this is starting the fifth book of the five books of Moses. Right, we're up to the fifth book. One second. Right. So, so I just want to sort of do a quick recap, sort of a quick introduction to the book of Devarim. Actually, if I remember correctly, we could look it up, but I think last year we did Devarim, right? I think we're at a year cycle. We have to look it up. It might be a year cycle now that we're doing the classes already. If anybody has those, you have? Oh, so we started before that.
I know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, so September 11th. Okay, that's an interesting day that it worked out that way. Right. Okay, so be it as is, right? But there's certain things that are always good to sort of recap a little bit and then always learn new things. And every time, even when we recap things, we're always learning things new. I don't recall if we started with Devarim or if we didn't start with Devarim, but be it as it is, right? Very interesting. The book of Devarim, right? You'll find that it speaks in a singular tense. It means to say that Moshe Rabbeinu is sort of narrating, where the rest of the Torah, the other four books, is the Torah speaks about what Hashem either spoke to Moshe or what is happening or what Moshe did or things that are happening over here, right? Is more of sort of Moshe narrating of what happened. Hashem, you'll find many times it says that Hashem dibar alai, Hashem spoke to me, and other things, right? We'll see later on. I'll point it out as we go through the parsha, right? But it's very interesting where it's Moshe sort of talking, and it's brought down that the fifth book, of course, is part of the five books of Moshe. It's not like it's not on a lower level like the prophets, which the prophets are still extremely high. Their prophets are part of the 24 books, the written Torah, right? But it's sort of a recap of Moshe speaking. Sort of Moshe wrote it, but Moshe wrote really all five books. But it's sort of Moshe recapping what happened the last 40 years in the desert. A lot of it's recapping. There are a few new halachos, right, in it, but a lot of the halachos that we have in here, a lot of them there's addition to halachos that we spoke about either before, where Moshe sort of recapping it. There are plenty of new halachos that were not mentioned before at all in the whole book of Devarim. But it's more of a Moshe sort of talking to the Jewish people and sort of on his deathbed telling the Jewish people about a recap and sort of giving them tochacha, giving them rebuke, as we would call positive reinforcement, right? That's what Moses is doing. And that really sets the stage to really, if you start off and you read it, it says, Eila Dvarma Shadibra Moshe el Kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moses spoke to all the Jewish people. We're talking about in verse 1. Be'evar Yarden, on the other side of the Yarden, Bamidbar, in the desert, right? Opposite of Suf, Ben Paran, and it goes into the different places, locations, exactly pinpointing exactly where Moshe was, right, when he spoke to the Jewish people, and these are the words. And basically, these are the words is really the whole, we're on page 938. Really, it's really referring to really the whole book of Devarim, primarily what he's going to say in a few minutes, really the whole book of Devarim. These are the words that Moses spoke to them, and Rashi points out that this was before his death, right? Rashi says that this was before his death, and these are the words, Elu divrei tochacha, right? These are words of rebuke, of positive reinforcement that Moses spoke. And then Rashi goes, and I encourage you to look, I think the English translation over here and the commentaries goes through it, but each one of these places represents something else that the Jewish people did in the desert. The Moses is reminding them about what they did negative, something negative where they should learn from what happened in that place. So these are not just the location of where he was exactly, but it's also a alluding to sort of in a rebuke of not directly speaking about the incident, not to embarrass them, not to make them distance from him, right? But sort of in a more of a gentle way. He said the location, but each one of those locations, why did he pick these things to sort of give the location? Is because each one of these things has something a rebuke to the Jewish people, but in a more gentle way. Sort of like, sometimes, you're talking to some people and your friends, or some might not be a rebuke, but he said, oh, you remember, let's just say, I don't know, Camp 1982, right? You remember, right? And anybody that's in the know knows what happened, right? When you talk about siblings, you remember when we were driving on the throughway, back from Bubby and Zadie, right? In our red van, in 1994, right? And everybody in my family, oh yeah, remember what happened there, right? So there's like certain things sometimes that a group of people know that you don't have to actually say the thing, but it actually alludes to something, and it's sort of a rebuke, and it's actually a healthy way sometimes to do that in an easygoing way. It's also a good practice for companies, right? For spouses, for parents, for synagogue, if they have a big community thing, and they're trying to get people to realize certain things. Sometimes it's like, remember what happened then? Okay, so now let's deal with that in a healthy way, right? Not actually speak about the actual scenario, right? Because it could embarrass some people, whatever it is. But okay, so now how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And that's sort of what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing over here. And this is a level of rebuke. And then it goes into some of the dates of what happened. And then it says after, if you turn the page, it just goes into after they got rid of Sichon, right, the king of Amori, right, and Og Melech Bashan, right. It goes through all this and the other side of the Yarden, and God, and then verse 6, it says, and God, Hashem Elokechem Dibur Aleinu B'Charv Leimar. God spoke to us, saying, right, Hashem Elokechem Selokenu. So you see again, this is where it's one of the places I told you. It speaks Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu is speaking a narrative, and God said. It doesn't say, and Hashem spoke like everywhere else. And then Vayidaber Hashem Moshe or Vayidaber Hashem Moshe B'nei Yisrael. We hear Moshe is giving over sort of narrating a story, right, of what Hashem spoke to us, saying, right, go away from the mountain, right, and go to Eretz Canaan, right, Re'eh, and then verse 5, Re'eh, Nasat Lifnechem Sa'aretz, look, I put in front of you this land, right, Bo V'yarsu Sa'aretz, go ahead and acquire the land, right, possess the land, right, where am I? I lost the place, sorry. That I promised to your forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Lazar, Machrem, for all your generations, right? So Moshe Rabbeinu has so far everything's good. I mean, except we said that he hit some things, but everything's good. He said God spoke to us, go to land, and just on a side note, and this is a famous thing, we might talk about this a little more on Shabbos, Mirza Hashem. Right? Yes, you stuck with me 3 weeks in a row. Sorry about that. Right? But we were speaking about it. Parshas Devarim always comes out before Tisha B'Av. This year it actually comes out the day before Tisha B'Av. But it always works out. Always falls out. They always make sure that it falls out. That's why we have Matas Maseh last week together. We didn't have Pinchas and Balak together because then it would have made Devarim further. Right? But it always works out. The Devarim always works out before Tisha B'Av, and there's many reasons, and one of them is going to be in a minute. But I think one of the reasons is throughout this parsha, but especially over here, it speaks about the love of Eretz Yisrael, and it speaks about the how Eretz Yisrael is the land of the Jewish people, right? Re'eh, go ahead and look, right? And I know we spoke about this in the past. There's different levels of knowledge, right? There's a level of knowledge of knowing, of seeing, of hearing something, right? You heard something, right? You heard that there's let's just say you heard that there's someone tells you, you heard that there's an arch in St. Louis, right? Before I moved to St. Louis, I came to St. before I actually was here. Before I moved here, I came for bar mitzvah, right? But before we came here, okay, I heard of the arch. Maybe I saw it, but okay, it was there. I know, right? But then when first time we drove up, right? Then we saw it, right? It was like, oh, there's the arch, right? There's the arch, right? And like you could see it from a distance, right? The level of knowledge of knowing that there's arch is on a much greater level, right? So Re'iyah, as it's saying, right, seeing, right, the pictures is 1,000 words. Right, seeing something nowadays, if you have to actually see it with your eyes, it's not a picture because pictures can be manipulated, right? So pictures are not 1,000 words anymore, right? But at least it used to be. But actually seeing something with your eyes, right, is 1,000 words. You can't tell me that this is not a plastic white cup. I mean, if you do, you could, but we'll probably, put you somewhere, right? Commit you somewhere. But you see this, that this is a white cup, right? So seeing is a much stronger level of emunah, belief, and knowing something. Moshe Rabbeinu says that God said, "Re'ei nasati," look, and it says, "No, da, you should know," or Shema, listen that I told you. Re'eh, look that I brought you. Right? The Sat Lifnechem, I placed in front of you. You're on the banks of the Jordan River. I placed in front of you here on the other side. You see it. It's not you're in Mitzrayim. You say, oh, we're going to go to a land. It's not like you're by Har Sinai. You say, oh, we're going to go to a land. It's not like you're still wandering and say, oh, we're going to go to a land. You're on the banks of the river. You see Eretz Yisrael on the other side. Right? You see the land. Re'eh, I'm going to give you this land. And it's just very empowering and something that we have to reflect on. We have to try as much as we can, and especially for those that haven't had the chance to go to Eretz Yisrael. But even if you had the chance, right, to dwell on that and to think about it and to try to go back as much as we can, right, is Re'eh, see that this is our land. It doesn't make a difference what other people say, right? This is our land, and we have to reinforce it, especially during this time when we're mourning the destruction of the temple, right? It's our land, and it's a land that Hashem promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And I want to add in something very sharp. Right? I'm going to add something in sharp that yes, it's our land, but it's the land that Hashem promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What is the land that Hashem promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? The land that Hashem promised Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov is, of course, the physical land, right? But it's a spiritual land. It's a land with the Beis Hamikdash. It's a land where we, every four amos, right, 4 cubic feet that you take, 6 cubic feet that you take, you got a mitzvah of walking in the land of Eretz Yisrael, the land where there's agricultural land, right? We spoke about this. We actually didn't speak last week, right? But 2 weeks ago, last week, right? I spoke about it in the recap. Right, that when it goes into the details of the land of Eretz Yisrael, last week's parsha, Matos, because there's Eretz Yisrael you have to know the exact borders because there's certain mitzvot that are only applicable in Eretz Yisrael. You can't do outside of Eretz Yisrael. You're a half a foot outside of Eretz Yisrael. You can't fulfill that mitzvah anymore. Right? There's certain agricultural mitzvahs and other things you could only fulfill in Eretz Yisrael. And so it has to tell you the boundaries. So the land that I gave Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's the land that I gave to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, not just the land of the Hermon and the Yam Melech and all these beautiful Tel Aviv beaches. And of course, that's great, right? But just notice I didn't say Eilat because Eilat is actually not officially in the biblical land of Eretz Yisrael, right? Just FYI. Right, of course we have it, and but it's not in the biblical land of Eretz Yisrael, right? But this is where we get mitzvahs. So I gave you the land of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that's part of what we have to mourn when we mourning of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. It's not just the Beis Hamikdash, right? It's not just the stones like we spoke about on Shabbos, right? But it's actually the kedusha, the holiness that we have, and that's what we says over here. The land that I gave you, that I promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because the land of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is a land of kedusha, a land of holiness. Right, and that's something to really dwell on, and it's a theme throughout the Parshas Devarim, but especially the book of Devarim, but especially in the Parshas Devarim. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu continues, and we're going to hopefully after this we'll skip a little further. But Moshe Rabbeinu continues, and he says, then the tone changes, right? And actually. When we read the parsha, when reading the parsha, the Baal Korah is going to change the tune. So he says like this: Hashem Elokeichem labor, right? Lo ucha lavadi. I told Hashem, I myself can't. I can lead you all by myself, right? Because Hashem made you prosperous like the land, like the stars of the stars of the sky, right? Um, Hashem made you great. And then verse 12, that's the verse I want to get to. Verse 12 says, Eicha esa lavadi, right? How, right? Eicha, that's a famous word that we're going to read on Tisha B'Av many times, right? And actually we changed the tune to the Eicha reading, right? Eicha esa lavadi, right? It changes the tune, right? And then Moshe Rabbeinu continues and says how you guys have strayed from Hashem, right? And he continues rebuking the Jewish people, right? Literally for just continues rebuking for the Jewish people for a little while, right? So I just want to touch on this for a minute, right? 1 second. Yeah, so I highly encourage you to go through the verses, right? But the next part goes ahead and speaks about the sin of, it goes into the sin of the Meraglim, right? The sin of Moshe Rabbeinu is recapping the sin of the spies, right? And it's long-winded. It's not directly. He speaks about, again, he says Hashem gave you this land, right? He's gonna, right? And you guys are in this desert. It's beautiful words. I'm not going to go through every verse. We don't have time to go through every verse, but I highly encourage you to go through the verses, right? But then it says like this, right? Right. So if you go to page 946, if you go to page 946, right? So there it speaks about, it says how you guys cried all night. But Yishma Hashem is called, God heard the sound of your words, right? And God swore, saying, right, if any of you see the land, right, that your fathers were planning on going in, right? And then it says, except for Kaleb and Yefuna, right, that he had a different way about him. And then Yeshua Banun, Omid Lefnechem, Yeshua Banun is going to stand in front of you, right? And your children, right, that you thought were going to be your children that you thought that was going to be, what was their complaint? Our children are going to get lost. They're going to get destroyed by the Canaanim, right? And your children that you thought that are going to get lost, right? They will go into the land, right? They will inherit the land, right? And you guys wander around until you die, right? So it just, again, the parsha just continues, right? The parsha continues until the second chapter, 948, and it goes through the storyline. But I just want to point out something. The storyline is very, again, it's from a different perspective than how it is in Parshas Shlach. In Parshas Shlach, it goes and tells you what happened, right? But the spies wanted to go, they come back, they're bad word, they cried. Hashem said, how you're crying, they're gonna be destroyed, and there's an only Kaleb and Yefuna. This is it goes Moshe Rabbeinu intertwined, because Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't want to necessarily just bring this up just to remind them, right? That's not nice, right? That's not nice. The commentaries ask that, on the contrary, you're not supposed to remind someone of a transgression that they did, right? You're not supposed to, unless, if they pass that. You're not supposed to remind them. You're not supposed to go, oh, you remember, when you used to be, used to go and do X, Y, and Z, right? Was it fun, right? How was it? Right? You're not supposed to ask them, right? If someone that didn't eat kosher and started eating kosher, you're not supposed to ask them, oh, so how was it going to that steakhouse or having milk and meat together or whatever? You're not supposed to ask them. You're not supposed to remind them, and that you're not even rebuking them. You're just sort of asking them. You're not supposed to remind them of their past in that way, right? If they want to bring it up and they want to talk about it, if there's a lesson to be learned from it, right? This time. So what's Moshe Rabbeinu doing over here? Sort of bring this all up. So, he's doing it in a very, he doesn't go directly and say that we say, oh, we don't want to go into the land, right? He brings it in a very, he brings it in as you guys cried that night, and only he's allowed, only Kalev and Yeshua, right? And your children that you said are not going to go, they will go. Now he's talking to you, he's talking to them, to the children. Don't forget, he's talking to the children, right? So he's talking to them saying that you're able to go in. Right? And then he finishes it off and saying that we said, oh, we sinned, we're going to go up anyways. And then the Amori came and they got wiped out, right? And then the nations went back. So I just want to, I think there's something very, there's a lot of important things. I think sort of just from the storyline, sometimes we just have to talk about the storyline. We're not necessarily going to every verse. We don't have time for that. But I think that the storyline and the way Moshe Rabbeinu brings us out, I think what he's doing over here, and what we could learn from this is that he's telling the generations going to Eretz Yisrael, he says that we have to remember that when we think that we know better, we get in trouble. Right? When we think that we know better, because he keeps on saying it's like a stock, right? It's like a dig, right? You guys know what a stock is, right? It's like a stock, right? If you look at just this sort of like this really, when I was going over the parsha, really caught my eye again this year. If you go to verse 39, right? Verse 39, he says, and as for your small children, whom you said that they will be taken captive, and your children who did not know good from evil to this day, they will come and they will come right there, and they shall give it to, and they will possess the land. And he's clearly saying, what do you guys thought, right? What you guys thought, oh no, we're doing this for our children, right? Our children, we can't go into the land because they're going to get captive. Oh, our children, that's what we're doing. They're coming with a good husband, with a good calculation, right? We can't do this. We have to make sure that, we want to make sure our children have a great education. So therefore we can't send them to Jewish day school, right? It's a good calculation. No. Don't start making calculations. You do the right thing. Listen to what Hashem says. Things will be taken care of. Right? You think you're not going into the land of Israel. We can't go in because our kids are going to be kept. No, they're the ones that are going in. Right? You guys, remember, you're the ones that are going in. You're the ones that your parents thought it would be better if you don't go into the land of Israel because you'd be captive. No, you guys stuck. You're going into the land of Israel. Right? And this is and again, just the way Moshe Rabbeinu brings it down. Right? It's a tremendous insight and tremendous something to reflect on. And again, especially during these 9 days, right? Always, but the time when we had a lot of struggle and a lot of things, and we sometimes we think we know better, right? Mirvesin Besser, right? We know better, right? We have these calculations. It's really better that we work on Shabbos because then we can make more money and then we can support and we could this and that. No. Hashem doesn't want you to work on Shabbos, so you don't work on Shabbos. You'll make whatever money you make without working on Shabbos, and you'll give tzedakah, all right, as much as you're able to give based on what you give. Right? We're doing this because it's better for, it's more inclusive for the shul. But if that's not halakhically okay, so that's not being more inclusive. That's just not inclusive because it's not halakhically okay, right? We have to still keep to what Hashem wants. But it's going to help the shul grow. That's not going to help the shul grow. It's on the contrary. It's going to ruin the shul because you're bringing in elements in the shul that are not part of the shul, what Hashem wants us from us. Now, of course, everything has to be, and everything has to be done in a fine way. And then we're talking about more it's just something that the concept, we have to remind ourselves, right? I heard this many times from people, I can't give as much tzedakah because I have to save money for this and for that, right? Hashem wants you to give 10%. If you want to give more, you could, but Hashem wants us to give 10%, right? Don't make cheshbonos, right? You give 10%. Don't start making, because I need this, and then later on I'll be able to give more, I'll be able to help. You give your 10%, and then Hashem will take care of you, right? You do what you're supposed to be doing, right? And I think this is a tremendous lesson Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Jewish people as they're going to the land of Israel. He's giving them really instructions. It's more of a rebuke, right, than instructions of how to make sure that they can stay in the land of Israel properly. How to make sure that when they go into the land of Israel, they'll be able to inherit the land properly and be able to stay in there. And as we see, unfortunately, we know the prophets, we know the Shoftim, we know the book, we know what happened. Right? Whenever they went away from what Hashem wanted them to do, it didn't work out well for them. Right? So I think that's one tremendous lesson that we can learn from this episode that he goes into. Um, it's just very interesting. And on another point, why is the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the Jewish people about is the sin of the spies, right? Why does he do that, right? Why doesn't he speak about the Chet Egel, right? Why doesn't he speak about crying about water, right? Or go chronologically. First speak about saying we didn't have water at or go through Yam Suf, speaking about taking the Jewish people out. Why is the first thing that he talks about is the sin of the Egel? The commentaries expand on it. So some say it's because it's really the last thing. No, it's not really the last thing, but it's really the last big thing sort of that happened. It's really the cause, it was the last sort of straw that broke the camel's back, sort of what caused the Jewish people to be stuck in the desert for 40 and not be able to go into land of Eretz Yisrael. All right, so that's what some people say. Therefore, he's sort of starting off with that. I was thinking, probably it's sort of probably part of different things that I've think throughout the years, right? But I was thinking that I think Moshe Rabbeinu, I think that what Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to tell the Jewish people is, and again, back to this lesson, this is the greatest contrast of this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to teach the Jewish people. And we're going to see this throughout. There's many lessons, but sort of this is the theme. I believe that the theme, Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to teach the Jewish people how to make sure that they stay in that land of Eretz Yisrael, right, in the right way, right? And this is the biggest contrast that they could, this generation, really appreciate, right? It says that when it goes through the Ten Commandments, right? It says that I'm your God who took you out of Mitzrayim. Right? So the commentaries ask, why doesn't it say Ani Hashem Lekechem Sa'aretz? It created the earth, right? Why? I mean, that's creating the earth, the world. It seems like a little bigger of a miracle than taking the Jewish people out of Egypt. Yes, the 10 plagues and taking out of Egypt is a major miracle. But taking them out of creating their whole universe, right? That's a pretty big deal, right? So why doesn't it say that? So the commentaries is many different answers. And one of the answers is because the Jewish people are able to relate to the God taking them out of Egypt. He just took them out, right? And we, as their descendants, are living proof of that God took us out of Egypt. The creation of the world, we weren't there, right? We weren't. Of course, we believe in it, but we weren't there. We can't really. As I've said in the past, and I don't want to digress from this, but there's no one that's really a believer, and there's no one that's really an atheist. We're all really agnostics, but the needle depends on where the needle is. If you're closer to a believer, or you're closer to an atheist, right? Because you can't prove that there's no God, right? You can't prove there's no God, right? But knowing that there's a God, then if we have the highest level of emunah that we have a God, then we'll never do a transgression. Right? How could we, right? I have a cup of Drano in front of me, right? You're not going to drink it, right? You have the most free will you want to drink it, but you're not. You know it's going to kill you, right? So if we have the highest level of emunah that we actually know that there's a God exists, we see if we could, lightning comes and strikes us every time, we would never be able to do a transgression. So it's the same thing with if we actually knew the God really on the highest level took us out and created the world, sort of not really have a free will. That's angel-like. That'll be an angel. They don't really have free will, right? So we're really all sort of agnostics. We're just much closer to believers, or we're closer to atheists, right? So too, that's why, say the commentaries that it says, "Asher chasing marriage in China took you out of China," because that's something that they actually experienced, right? So I think along the same lines, Moshe Rabbeinu is starting off with the sin of the Meraglim, because that's something that this generation, right, the one that's going to Eretz Yisrael, they experienced that, right? They experience it. That's a contrast. It's something that they know. Yes, they're going in, but their parents are not going. They saw Nebuch. Every one of them had to say Kaddish and Yiskar, right? Imagine that Yiskar, right? Whoa, that'll be a long Yiskar, right? But every one of them had to say Kaddish, right? Because every one of their parents passed away, right? and they experience that and they know that. So Moshe Rabbeinu, starting off, right, he wants to bring this home on something that's relatable to them, something that could bring the greatest contrast out to this point. And I believe that's one of the reasons why it goes and speaks about this story first. Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, so let's move on, right? Where then it goes in saying that they're going to start on the way to Eretz Yisrael, right? It speaks about the children of Lod, Ammon, and Moab, and how they didn't let them come. 1 second, there was something here I wanted to talk about. Second, I apologize. Yeah. Yeah, so if you go through, if you turn to page 952, when it speaks about when it speaks about the war with Sichon, it goes through the war that they fought with Sichon and how they won Sichon, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu was very clear saying how they did not want to fight with them. They just asked to travel through their land, and they didn't want. They came out to fight with them, right? And then on the bottom, right after it speaks about the war with Sichon, it goes into the war with Og. Right, and it says, verse 2 is a very interesting verse, right? A very, very interesting verse, and something that really needs to be expanded on. It says like this: it says, "Vayomar Hashem alai," and Hashem told me. Again, just bring this point out. We're not going to do it too many more times, but again, you see how Moshe is speaking in a singular, in a narrative way. Al tira oso, do not be scared of him. I'm going to put him in your hands. Speak about Og Malach HaBashan, right? Og, the giant, right? It's called Ammon, his whole nation, his arzo and his land, Vasislo, and I'll do to him Kasher, Sichon. You'll do to him just like you wiped out Sichon, Melech HaMori. Have no fear. And then it says, V'yitan Hashem Elokeinu b'yadenu, and Hashem put him. The Rashi, and it's really a Gemara and a Medrash, right? Rashi asks, right? Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem said, Moshe Rabbeinu said that God told me not to be scared. Why would Moshe be scared of Og? Right? Okay, so he was a giant, right? But Moshe had complete faith in Hashem. Right? It says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, Sichon, but Rashi asks a question a different way. Sichon, lo hutzrach lomar al tiroso. By Sichon, it doesn't have to say, don't be scared of him, even though it says that Sichon was more powerful than Og. Right, the nations of Sichon were the most powerful nation at the time. Right, they were sort of like sipped up powers. Right, people. Right, and it doesn't say over there by Sichon to be scared. Rashi says, so why by Og? Why by Og does it have to say that? Don't be scared of them. Why did Hashem have to tell Moshe not to be scared of Og? Why would Moshe be scared? Moshe Rabbeinu knows that he's doing Hashem's will. Moshe Rabbeinu knows that Hashem will protect him, right? So why by Og does Hashem need to tell him? So Rashi says something, quoting the Medrash, something fascinating, right? And something so powerful, such a powerful lesson. Rashi says like this, Ela misyara haya Moshe. Moshe was scared, right? Shelo tamod lo schush sheshimis Lavram Avinu. I don't say Lavram Avinu, Lavram, right? So, who was Og Melech HaBashan? Right. So the Medrash tells us, and the Gemara speaks about this. The Medrash tells us that Og was actually pretty old. And not only was he a giant, but Og was back in the story by Avraham Avinu. Right, when the 4 kings came to fight the 5 kings, and Lot got captured way back when. Right. It's actually probably close to say in a few weeks from now. Right. It's at Parshah. It's the beginning of Bereshis, right? So it says by Yaretz HaPalit, and the messenger ran and told Avram Avinu that Lot was captured, and that's when Avram Avinu went to go save Lot, right? So who was that Palit? Who was that messenger? So Rashi over here, and Rashi over there says that it was Og Melech HaBashan, it was Og. Right? It's the same Og that the Medrash says is actually sitting on, he was left over from the Mabul. Right? According to one Medrash, you can ask, but that says that all mankind comes from Noach, so then it was Og. Good question. Maybe he wasn't able to have kids. I don't know, right? But it doesn't make a difference. But for our purpose right now, right, this is Og that went ahead and told Abraham Avinu. So says Moshe Rabbeinu, Og went ahead and told Moshe, Abraham Avinu, that his nephew was captured. So he had some schos. He went and he helped Abraham Avinu, right? He told Abraham Avinu that he had schos. He told Abraham Avinu, right, that his nephew was captured and he was able to save his nephew. Right? So therefore, says Rashi, right, that Moshe Rabbeinu was scared of the schos, of the merit of Og having, because he helped Avram Avinu, that merit would protect Og, right? And therefore, right? Therefore, that's why, right? Therefore, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu was scared a little bit. Right? So Hashem told him, Al Tira, don't be scared. Right? There's nothing to be scared about. Don't worry about that little merit. His merit was taken care of a long time ago, and don't worry about it. The commentaries are baffled by this Rashi. Right? Baffled by this Rashi. Because we know the Rashi back by the story of the 4 kings against the 5, right? Rashi tells us that Lot had bad intentions, right? But Lot had bad intentions. What was Lot's intention? Lot's intentions were, right, that that Avram Avinu will go and fight the 4 kings, and Avram is probably going to die. He's an old man with a few foot soldiers, and these 5 kings were mighty. They were able to wipe out the 5 kings, right? Avram is going to die, and then if Avram dies, what he could do? He could go take Sarah, right? Sarah was the most sought out lady at the time, right? Right, so he could go take. He wouldn't take Sarah just like that, right? At least back then they had some level of morality, right? We see, like, as soon as Paro found out that Sarah was married, right? He said, "Oh my gosh." Abimelech said, "Oh my gosh," right? Og Melech Habasha wouldn't take her. Nowadays, even that level of morality is like, okay, what's wrong, right? But back then, at least they had some level on their level. So if Avram dies, then he could take him. So Lot, as the commentators, Lot had bad intentions. He didn't even have good intentions. He didn't do it to come and help Avram Avinu. Right? So what is this? So what's the merit that Moshe Rabbeinu was scared of? There's the commentaries, and this is such an important lesson. Say the commentaries that this underscores the power of a mitzvah, the power of doing something that we are so clueless. Right? We are so far removed. Clueless is the wrong word, but we're so far removed of what the value of a mitzvah is. Right? Even with a bad intention, but at the end of the day, it still helped Avram Avinu. He had a bad intention, but Lemais at the end of the day, he still helped Avram Avinu. Right? So even with his bad intention, and because it helped Avram Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, who understood the power of a mitzvah, Moshe Rabbeinu understood what a mitzvah represents. He said, "Oh my gosh, right? Oh my gosh, he has some schos. Did he ever get paid back for that schos?" And Hashem said, "Don't worry about it." How much we have to reflect and realize, right? What Pirkei Avos says, right? Don't lose schar mitzvah, right? We don't know the schar of a mitzvah. We don't know the reward of a mitzvah. Right? That one has to think about when he's giving up to doing a mitzvah, right? What the reward of that mitzvah is. If it's coming out to learn, if it's giving tzedakah, if it's making a blessing over food, if it's wearing a yarmulke, right? If it's keeping Shabbos or partial Shabbos, right? Wherever you're holding, right? Davening, right? The reward of a mitzvah, we can't comprehend the reward of a mitzvah where we're giving up, right? That just to try to understand it on some level, that Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The most holy man of all times, right? Was scared that this minute chesed and with a bad intention that Og did, he was scared of that. How much more so when we do something with the right intent, or if we do something because we're trying to have the right intent, right? Even if we do something without, knowing what we're doing so well, right? What great reward, right? What great reward. Hopefully this encourages us, right? And myself too, to say, wow, there's a famous chaparayna mitzvah, right? Remember in camp, we used to sing chaparayna mitzvah, grab a mitzvah, right? Grab a mitzvah, right? Grab it. Try to get a mitzvah. And then the flip side, right? The schar aveira, right? The punishment of an aveira, of a transgression, right? The lack, it's something. It's if a mitzvah, right, is wow, right? So unfortunately, also we remove ourselves from that relationship with Hashem every time we do something, and of course it's not as great if we do it without knowledge, or of course it's not as great if we do it, unintentionally, right? But it's something to reflect on. Right, so I think this is a tremendous thought, right? Something really to reflect on as we're going, as we're ending the summer and ready to go to Elul, right? Something to reflect on, right? That we're rounding the corner. I know we don't think about this, but we're rounding the corner. We're almost at the end of the year, right? We don't think about it, but we're almost at the end of the year. So let's try to chaperein as many as we can. Go ahead. That is correct, but because Hashem said his reward is not enough to overcome this war, but he got some reward. They say that he lived for so long because of that. That's one of the things they say, right? But what we're saying is that Moshe Rabbeinu, he was scared, right? That's the thing. He was scared. Oh my gosh, I don't know if you got any reward for it or not, or even if not. But look what great reward. That's the thing. Moshe Rabbeinu understood how much the reward is worth. He didn't know exactly either, because that's only once you come up to Shemayim, right? But he had at least a fear, and Hashem said, "Don't worry about it. His reward was taken care of for that. Have no fear about that." A good point, excellent point. Okay, let's just finish off, right? We just have a few minutes. I just want to sort of, I think it's just an encouraging way to finish. This parsha, and then right before we go into Tisha B'Av and our difficult times, we go all the way to the end of the parsha, right? I think I spoke about we sort of finished this off last time also when we finished the book of Bamidbar. But the last verse in this week's parsha is right, page 956. Is the last verse in this week's parsha, right? It says, and the verse before it says, Yeshua, I commanded Yeshua that he's going to go and he's going to take you into the land, right? And the last verse says, Lo shira, lo tirom, don't be scared of them. Hashem Elokeichem hu yinachem lachem, right? Because Hashem, your God, will fight for you, right? Hashem, your God, will fight for you, right? And again, this is something that we have to reinforce in ourselves, right? That we have to do our hishtadlut, we have to do our effort, we have to train our army, and we have to do our politics, and we have to get coalitions, and we have to do our effort, of course, right? But at the end of the day, we can never forget that Hashem Elokeichem, Hashem your God, hu yinachem lachem, He will fight for you. He will wage the war for you, right? At the end of the day, we have to have our emunah in Hashem. We have to have our faith in Hashem that He will ensure the security of the Jewish people. Right? There might be unfortunately a casualty here and a casualty there, or a few more casualties, but the security of the Jewish people is in the hands of God. Right, and that's why the Jewish people are still around, right? So, as we said, by one of the things that we could think about on Tisha B'Av is, of course, we have to mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but that we're still around to mourn the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, in itself is a miracle. Should give us the biggest hope that there will be a time when Tisha will turn into Yom Tov. Right, this will turn into a time of joy. Right, so Hashem Elokeichem, Hashem your God wages a war for us. Right, and that's something that we have to incorporate into our lives. It's not only, of course, the greater security of the Jewish people, but it's our own personal lives also. Hashem fights our wars for us. We have to do our shtadlus. We're nervous. It's similar to what we spoke about in the beginning of this week's parsha. Right, we start making cheshbonos and we start saying this. If we do what we're supposed to be doing, right, both in our business and our health, right, and in our family and our relationship, Hashem will fight for us. Hashem will be on our back. Who's going to be our wingman, right? Our wingman in our business, our wingman in our health, our wingman in our relationships, our wingman in the shul, the security of the shul, our wingman in security of the community, of the Jewish people. Who's our wingman? Hashem Elokeichem. Who you can't have any better wingman than that. Right? So, but we have to do our part too. We have to make Hashem our wingman. Right? So as a global Jewish people, He's always be our wingman. Right? But for us to have that strong wingman next to us of Hashem, right, we have to do our part too. Right? And the more we build our relationship with Hashem, right, the stronger our wingman becomes. And there could be no greater wingman than Hashem. Hashem Elokechem Yilachem Lachem. Hashem our God will fight for us. Thank you all for joining us and wishing everybody an easy fast.